That small piece of change in your pocket is a direct descendant of ancient psychological warfare. Long before social media or television, empires weaponized minted coinage as a form of mass political propaganda. They turned the simple act of buying bread into a daily lesson in loyalty and power. By the end of this story, you will never look at a quarter or a dime the same way again. How did a Roman emperor's face become more familiar to a farmer in Britain than his own neighbors? What hidden messages are still stamped onto the money we use today? This journey reveals that the most effective propaganda is the kind you carry without a second thought. What does the currency in your wallet say about the world you live in right now? Before the first coin was struck, power was a local and often invisible idea. A king's authority might be felt through the demand for taxes or the presence of soldiers, but it wasn't something an ordinary person could hold in their hand. Commerce was a messy, uncertain affair, a negotiation of value based on the weight and purity of irregular metal ingots or the direct exchange of goods. Trust resided entirely in the scales and the word of the person across from you. Then, in the ancient kingdom of Lydia around the 7th century before the Common Era, something profound changed. They began producing small, bean-shaped lumps of a gold and silver alloy called electrum, stamped with a simple emblem. This was not merely a financial innovation, it was the invention of branded authority. The Greek city-states, quick to see its potential, adopted and refined the technology, creating the beautiful silver coinage that would fuel their economies and their ambitions. The true genius of this system lay not just in standardization, but in its psychological reach. For the first time in history, a central authority could place a physically identical object, bearing its official symbols, into the hands of every single citizen, merchant, and soldier. This object was durable enough to last for generations, portable enough to travel across continents, and so essential to daily survival that refusing it was not an option. A stone inscription could be ignored, a herald's speech could be forgotten, but a coin was a persistent, necessary whisper of power with every transaction. Historian David M. Shapps describes coinage as a fundamental claim of sovereignty. By defining what constituted value, a state was declaring its ultimate right to govern every aspect of life. The consistent weight and purity were a silent promise of stability, building a bedrock of trust upon which all other messages could be printed. That blank metallic canvas, once just a piece of precious metal, had become the world's first mass medium, waiting for its first political campaign. The blank canvas of the coin now demanded its first masterpiece, and the rulers of the ancient world knew exactly what to paint. They did not start with portraits of themselves. Instead, they reached for the heavens. The very first and most enduring propaganda strategy etched onto metal was the crafting of a divine mandate. A citizen in ancient Athens, turning over a heavy silver tetradrachm in his palm, would not see a politician or a general. He would see the solemn gaze of the goddess Athena, her sacred owl resting on the reverse. This was a deliberate, genius-level move. The state was not just issuing currency, it was forging an unbreakable link between its own economic power and the divine favor of its protector. Owning this coin meant participating in a sacred economy, where every transaction subtly reinforced the idea that the city's prosperity and security flowed directly from its holy alliance. The message was clear: challenging the state was not just treason, it was sacrilege. This practice answered a deep, almost universal human longing for order and sanctioned leadership. By placing Zeus, Apollo, or a local patron deity on the obverse, the front of the coin, authorities communicated that their rule was preordained, blessed, and legitimate. The coin became a tiny, circulating temple. Alexander the Great mastered this art on an imperial scale. As he conquered lands from Greece to India, he faced the monumental task of uniting countless cultures under his banner. His solution was minted in gold and silver. He issued coins bearing his own image, but it was an image carefully crafted for a divine purpose. He was often depicted with the distinctive ram's horns of the Egyptian god Ammon, whom the Greeks associated with Zeus. This was not vanity, it was high-stakes political branding. Alexander presented himself as a semi-divine figure, a living fusion of Hellenistic kingship and Eastern divinity. For a soldier from Macedon and a merchant in Babylon, the same coin communicated a powerful, unifying idea. Their ruler was not merely a man, but an agent of cosmic order. This psychological lever, the suggestion that political power and divine will were one and the same, proved to be immensely powerful. It transformed coins from simple tokens of trade into portable instruments of spiritual and political authority, a strategy so effective that it would echo through the corridors of power for centuries to come. But a face, unlike a symbol, could age, change, and tell a more personal story. The second great strategy of coin propaganda was the invention of the Imperial Portrait, a move that transformed abstract state authority into a tangible human connection. Picture a Roman legionary stationed in the cold, misty hills of Britannia. His monthly pay was a handful of silver denarii, each one stamped with the stern, unmistakable profile of the emperor. In a world without photographs or portraits in every home, this face became the single most recognizable visage across thousands of miles. It was a constant physical reminder in the palm of your hand of who commanded the legions, who guaranteed the value of the metal, and who sat at the very center of the civilized world. Rome perfected this art of personal branding. Unlike the divine symbols of earlier Greek coins, Roman imperial portraits were carefully curated biographies in miniature. They showed the emperor not as he truly was, but as he needed to be seen, aging gracefully over the years, depicted in military garb to emphasize his role as commander, or crowned with laurels to signify victory and divine favor. Every detail was a message. A beard might signal philosophical wisdom adopted from the Greeks, while a particularly noble profile projected dignity and stability. As numismatist Andrew Burnett has noted, these coins functioned as the newspapers of the Roman Empire. They announced the accession of a new ruler, celebrated military triumphs, and promoted dynastic continuity by showing a father and his chosen heir side by side. For a farmer in Gaul or a merchant in Syria, handling these coins created a powerful, if one-sided, relationship. The emperor became a familiar figure, a distant but constant patriarch. This strategy brilliantly shrank the vast empire, making it feel more connected and personally loyal to the individual at its head. It was the ancient equivalent of a political campaign poster, but one you couldn't avoid, one you needed to live. The imperial portrait turned every transaction into a silent pledge of allegiance, foreshadowing the cult of personality that would define leadership for millennia to come. The power of a face could be challenged, but the power of a completed fact was far more difficult to deny. This leads us to the third masterful strategy of coin propaganda, the commemoration of military victory. Empires transformed their coins into permanent, circulating monuments, designed not just to celebrate a win, but to manufacture an unassailable narrative of triumph. For the conquering power, these coins were a public relations triumph. They reassured citizens at home of their army's invincibility and justified the immense cost of war. For those on the losing side, however, they represented something far more profound and psychologically devastating. Consider a person in the province of Judea in the years after a great conflict. In their hand is a bronze coin issued by the Roman victors. On one side is the profile of Emperor Vespasian. On the other is a stark scene. A Roman trophy stands victorious, while beneath it sits a bound female figure representing the conquered Judean people. The inscription reads simply, JUDAEA CAPTA, JUDAEA has been captured. This was not merely a record of history, it was a daily, inescapable reminder of subjugation. Every time that coin changed hands to buy food or pay a tax, it reinforced a brutal lesson: resistance was futile, and your defeat is now the official story we all agree to tell. This practice of minting victory was widespread and deliberate. Centuries earlier, the famous Athenian owl coins, symbols of the city's wealth and wisdom, were themselves funded by silver extracted from conquered mines at Laurium. Their very existence was a testament to imperial resource extraction. Later, Rome would issue coins celebrating the subjugation of Britannia, showing a mourning warrior woman, or the conquest of Dacia, depicting its defeated king. Each of these issues served a chilling dual purpose. Externally, they acted as a warning to any other province or kingdom considering defiance, a preview of their own potential future on imperial currency. Internally, they forged social cohesion, uniting the diverse populations of the empire in a single, sanctioned narrative of military destiny and the secured peace that only Roman power could provide. The coin became a tool to write history from the perspective of the victor, in a language everyone understood, the language of commerce and survival. It curated a story of inevitable triumph, deliberately designed to marginalize dissent and make the reality of conquest feel like a natural, permanent state of the world. Yet the most insidious propaganda was not stamped on the surface, but woven into the very metal itself. A Roman merchant in the 3rd century might not have noticed at first, just a slight change in the color, a less satisfying ring when the coin hit the counter. Over time, however, the silver denarius in his hand grew paler, lighter, as the imperial mint secretly reduced the precious metal content, mixing in more and more common copper. This practice, known as debasement, was a silent scream of imperial distress, a financial maneuver with profound psychological consequences. While the portrait of the emperor still promised stability, the material reality whispered of wars, empty treasuries, and a state struggling to keep its promises. Debasement was a desperate form of funding, allowing emperors to pay vast armies or finance colossal public buildings without the immediate political risk of raising taxes. It was, in essence, creating money from nothing, an ancient form of quantitative easing with the emperor's face as the only collateral. The immediate effect was a hidden tax on everyone who used the currency, as the real value of their savings slowly eroded through inflation. But the political message was carefully crafted to overshadow this economic decay. The same devalued coins were then distributed as donatives, lavish gifts of cash to soldiers and citizens. Imagine the spectacle of an emperor ascending a platform, scattering coins into a cheering crowd at the games, or a soldier receiving a hefty bonus for his loyalty. In that moment, the coin was not a piece of debased metal. It was a direct symbol of imperial generosity and personal bond. The state was broadcasting a powerful, manipulative narrative: the emperor is the source of your sustenance. He provides the bread and the circuses, he pays the army, his portrait is your guarantee of prosperity. This intricate dance transformed monetary policy into a tool of mass perception management. It bought short-term loyalty and manufactured an image of boundless, divine-like provision, even as the long-term foundation of trust, the intrinsic value of the currency, was being quietly hollowed out. The lesson was clear: control over money meant control over the story of empire itself, a story that could be printed not just in images, but in the fading luster of the coin in your palm. But the propaganda was not only in the metal or the portrait, it was also in the very words stamped around them. A Roman coin from the reign of Emperor Augustus carries a small, potent inscription, CAESARDIVIF. To a modern eye, it is an arcane abbreviation. To a citizen of the empire, it was a headline: Caesar, son of the divine. In just a few letters, it wove together political office, dynastic lineage, and a claim to sacred ancestry. These inscriptions, known as legends, were the final and perhaps most sophisticated layer of coin propaganda, transforming each piece of currency into an imperial decree in miniature. They were not simple labels, they were carefully focus-tested political slogans, packed with ideological meaning and legal authority. A coin could declare the emperor's official titles, Imperator, Pontifex Maximus, Augustus, each one a brick in the architecture of his power. It could honor a deified predecessor, solidifying a dynasty's divine right to rule. Most powerfully, it could broadcast virtues. A single word like piets, meaning duty or loyalty, or virtus, meaning courage and manly excellence, was not a description of the emperor's character. It was an official command for the values the state demanded from its people. These words framed the ruler as the living embodiment of the empire's ideals. With the rise of Christianity under emperors like Constantine the Great, the textual propaganda evolved seamlessly. The pagan gods vanished, replaced by symbols like the Chi-Rho and inscriptions proclaiming the emperor's faith, such as in hoc signo vinces, "In this sign you shall conquer." The message adapted, but the function remained identical, to align secular power with the prevailing cosmic order. For the vast, multilingual empire, this was a tool of breathtaking efficiency. Whether you spoke Latin in Rome, Greek in Alexandria, or a local Celtic dialect in the provinces, the standardized text on a coin was a constant unifying thread. It reinforced the official narrative with every market purchase and tax payment. Historians observe that the evolution of these legends, from simple names to long, elaborate strings of honorifics, mirrors the growing absolutism and bureaucratic nature of imperial power. Even an illiterate farmer handling the same coin day after day would come to recognize its symbols and, through conversation, absorb its core message. The coin became a talking point and a teaching tool, its tiny text ensuring that the voice of the emperor and the ideology he represented was heard in the most remote corners of his domain, one transaction at a time. From the standardized legends of Rome, we travel back to a single, world-altering campaign that first demonstrated the full, unifying power of minted propaganda. The conquests of Alexander the Great created an empire that stretched from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India, a patchwork of ancient cultures and languages with no common thread. His genius was recognizing that thread could be made of gold and silver. As his armies marched east, they were followed not just by supply trains, but by mobile mints, striking coins at a staggering pace to pay the tens of thousands of soldiers in his multi-ethnic force. These were not mere paychecks, they were the primary tool for building a new cosmopolitan identity. A Greek hoplite and a Persian cavalryman might speak different tongues, but they both received the same heavy silver tetradrachm. On one side, it bore the unmistakable profile of Alexander himself, portrayed not as a traditional bearded Greek king, but as a youthful, clean-shaven, heroic figure, often with the flowing hair and divine attributes of the god Heracles. This was a deliberate, revolutionary portrait. It presented Alexander as a new kind of leader, energetic, God-touched, and transcending any single ethnic identity. The coins created a visual lingua franca, a common artistic language that everyone in his vast army, and eventually in the markets of the cities he founded, could understand. The economic policy was breathtakingly simple and effective. By flooding the conquered territories with this high-quality, uniform currency, Alexander actively pushed local coinages out of circulation. A merchant in Babylon or Taxila now found it vastly more practical to conduct business using the familiar Alexander coin that a soldier from Macedon or a trader from Egypt would also accept. This was not just a monetary takeover, it was a quiet, relentless campaign of cultural homogenization. the coin became the most common object in daily life that carried a Hellenistic ideal. But Alexander's propaganda was also cleverly syncretic. While the imagery was fundamentally Greek, often featuring Zeus or Athena, the sheer scale of production and the Eastern motifs that sometimes crept in reflected the blended reality of his empire. He was building a fusion culture, and the currency was its most tangible symbol. Most importantly, this system was designed for permanence. Alexander centralized minting authority, ensuring consistency from Macedonia to the Indus River. The sheer volume of coins he produced meant that long after his sudden passing, his portrait continued to circulate for centuries, a ghostly, persistent reminder of the unified world he attempted to create. His successor kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Asia, would all copy his model, placing their own portraits on coins of identical weight and style. Alexander's real legacy was not just the territory he conquered, but the powerful idea he minted into reality, that currency could be the primary engine for forging a supranational identity, binding disparate peoples together under a shared economic and visual system that outlived the conqueror himself. A single bronze cestatius, fresh from the imperial mint, carried a new emperor's face out into the world. Its journey was the journey of the empire itself. It might begin in the pocket of a paymaster in Rome, handed to a legionary bound for the Rhine frontier. That soldier could spend it at a garrison town's market, where a Syrian merchant, recognizing its standard value, would add it to a leather purse destined for a caravan heading east along the Silk Road. Months later, that same worn coin could be traded for spices in Palmyra, its message traveling farther than any courier. This was the Roman system at its most brilliant, turning currency into a circulatory system for political information. The timing of a new coin issue was as strategic as a military campaign. Within weeks of a power transfer, often a violent one, mints across the empire would flood the economy with coins bearing the new ruler's portrait and titles. This was not just an announcement, it was a fait accompli in metal. For a provincial governor or a local chieftain, receiving these new coins was the definitive signal that a new chapter had begun, and loyalty was expected. The message was immediate and non-negotiable. The reverse of the coin was where the empire sold its vision. An emperor who came to power through intrigue might prominently feature the word libertas, freedom, assuring a nervous senate and populace. Another, facing external threats, would emphasize securitas, the promise of safety under his watch. These were not abstract concepts, they were branded commitments. When the Flavian dynasty built the Colosseum, they didn't just erect an amphitheater, they minted coins depicting it. This transformed a public works project into a circulating monument, a testament to imperial generosity that reached citizens who would never see Rome. Personified figures like Britannia or Hispania appeared, not as conquered territories, but as peaceful, integrated members of the Roman world. Even the simple announcement of a congyrium, a cash gift to the people, was stamped onto the currency. Imagine a citizen receiving the gift and then using the very same coin that advertised it to buy his daily bread. The state's benevolence and the means to enjoy it were fused into one object. This constant, omnipresent stream of imagery created a shared reality. Whether you were a senator in the Forum or a farmer in Gaul, the coins in your possession told a consistent story of imperial achievement, stability, and provision. It made every transaction a subtle act of participation in that narrative. After a period of civil war or crisis, a new series of high-purity coins bearing hopeful slogans like RENOVATIO, renewal, acted as a psychological reset button, attempting to restore trust through tangible means. The Roman state understood that to control the economy was to control the story, and they wrote that story in gold, silver, and bronze, ensuring it was read in the marketplace, the barracks, and the home every single day. This industrial scale of propaganda made the empire's preferred version of itself inescapable, a masterclass in perception management that turned metal into the very pulse of political life. The Roman system of propaganda was a masterpiece of earthly power, but as the empire fractured, a new vision for coinage emerged from the east. In the vaults of Constantinople, a different kind of currency was born, one designed not just to rule a world but to outlast time itself. The Byzantine Solidus, a coin of such legendary consistency that it remained the trusted dollar of the Mediterranean for over 700 years. Its physical perfection was the first part of its message, a gold piece of such unwavering purity and precise weight that it became the bedrock of international trade from Europe to China. To hold a solidus was to hold a promise of absolute stability, a tiny, gleaming anchor in a sea of historical change. But the true genius of this coin lay in how its designers transformed that material reliability into a profound ideological statement. Following the division of the Roman world, the Eastern Empire consciously reshaped its identity, and its money became the primary canvas for this new vision. The old pagan gods and scenes of martial victory faded away. In their place emerged a currency of serene, sacred authority. The emperor's portrait shifted from the classic Roman profile to a full-faced frontal view. This was no longer a dynamic military leader, but a hieratic, almost iconic figure, staring directly at the holder with an expression of detached divine sanction. He was often shown holding a cross or a globe surmounted by a cross, symbols of his role as Christ's representative on earth, but the emperor was no longer the sole focus. For the first time, the coinage regularly featured the image of Christ Pantocrator, the Virgin Mary, or various saints. This was a revolutionary step. By placing the divine and the imperial side by side, the state was minting a theological argument, explicitly tying the survival and legitimacy of the secular government to the direct will and protection of God. The inscriptions reinforced this sacred contract. Words like Jesus Christ, King of Kings, or Mother of God encircled the portraits, and the cross became the dominant symbol, appearing on the steps of the throne or as the emperor's scepter. This pervasive religious propaganda served multiple, brilliant purposes in a theocratic state. It provided a powerful source of unity for a diverse population bound together by Orthodox Christianity. It offered crucial legitimacy to emperors whose hold on power was often contested, framing even a violent usurpation as part of a divinely ordained plan. And it clearly distinguished the Christian Byzantine Empire from both its pagan Roman past and its rising Islamic rivals, whose own coins pointedly avoided human imagery. The unchangeable solidus itself became the ultimate proof of this grand claim. Its economic reliability suggested a deeper, metaphysical stability. The message was clear: as surely as this gold coin retains its value century after century, so too does God protect our eternal empire. In a world of invasions, plagues, and shifting borders, the solidus was a masterclass in using currency to project an unshakable reality, making faith and finance inseparable in the palm of your hand. The gleaming solidus was a masterpiece of sacred branding, but its true power was unlocked not in the vault, but in the marketplace. The most potent weapon in the arsenal of ancient propaganda was not the artistry of the coin, but the sheer, grinding repetition of its message. Think of the modern corporate logo you see on a product, a billboard, a screen, thousands of times until its shape and color trigger an instant, unconscious association. Ancient empires perfected this psychological principle centuries ago, turning the coin into the ultimate tool of subconscious absorption. The genius was in the delivery system. A royal decree could be ignored, a statue could be walked past, but a coin was an object of necessity. Its propaganda was delivered passively, through the simple, tactile acts of daily survival. Every time a farmer paid his tax with a handful of bronze asses bearing the emperor's stern profile, he was not just settling a debt, he was performing a tiny, ritual act of recognition. Every time a merchant counted out silver denarii to purchase grain, his fingers traced the inscribed promises of peace and abundance. This was not a message you listened to, it was a message you lived with, a constant, low-frequency hum in the background of existence. Through this relentless, mundane repetition, something profound happened in the collective mind. The ruler's face became as familiar as the sunrise. His symbols, the eagle of Jupiter, the crossed cornucopias of plenty, the laurel wreath of victory, ceased to be political statements and became simply part of the visual landscape of life. They were not argued for, they were simply there, day after day, transaction after transaction. This environmental conditioning created powerful, learned associations. The repeated image of a bound captive on a coin over years taught a subtle lesson about the futility of resistance. The ever-present goddess of fortune suggested that prosperity flowed directly from the state. The constant pairing of the emperor's portrait with the act of receiving your wages or buying your bread forged a deep, almost primal link between his authority and your personal security. Historians note that this process made the state's preferred narrative feel less like propaganda and more like simple, uncontested reality. It shaped public opinion not through intellectual persuasion, but through a form of behavioral psychology, using the rhythms of economic life as its vehicle. The citizen did not need to believe the emperor was divine, he simply needed to use the money. In that daily, unthinking act, the ideology was transferred, absorbed, and normalized. This ancient technique of using repetitive, omnipresent imagery to condition belief finds a direct echo in our modern world, in the curated realities of advertising and media that surround us. The lesson from the Mint is clear. The most effective ideas are not those we are told to believe, but those we are given no choice but to live with until they feel like our own. A coin minted in Roman Egypt tells a story of careful political negotiation. On one side, the stern profile of the emperor gazes out, a non-negotiable symbol of Roman authority. But flip it over, and you find the serene face of Serapis, the powerful Greco-Egyptian god of the underworld and abundance, a deity deeply revered by the local population. This was not a mistake or a compromise, it was a masterstroke of targeted propaganda. The most successful empires realized that a single, rigid message broadcast from the capital could feel alienating in distant provinces, potentially breeding quiet resentment among the people whose loyalty was most crucial. Their solution was both pragmatic and psychologically astute. They allowed, and often directly supervised, provincial mints to produce hybrid coinage. These local issues blended the mandatory imperial portrait on the obverse with carefully chosen regional symbols on the reverse. In Roman Britain, coins might feature a familiar imperial face alongside a local horse or chariot motif, designs that echoed the pre-Roman Celtic coinage still in living memory. In the eastern provinces, Greek legends might accompany the emperor's image, while in Judea, coins sometimes omitted the emperor's portrait entirely during sensitive periods, using neutral symbols like palm trees or ships instead. This practice served a brilliant dual purpose. For the local person handling the coin, it created a point of cultural recognition and respect. Seeing their own god, animal, or script stamped alongside the emperor's face sent a subtle but powerful message. Your traditions are acknowledged, and you have a place within this empire. It made Roman rule feel less like a foreign imposition and more like a collaborative framework. For the central administration back in Rome, however, this flexibility was the ultimate demonstration of control. By permitting and regulating these local variations, they were not conceding power, they were strategically co-opting local identity. The very act of minting a hybrid coin required the provincial mint to operate under imperial license, using standardized weights and placing the emperor's image in the prime position. It was a visible, daily reminder that even local expression now existed within a Roman system. This sophisticated approach extended far beyond the Roman world. The Kushan Empire, which controlled key trade routes between India, China, and the Mediterranean, produced stunning gold coins that were cultural palimpsests. They might feature the Kushan king in heavy Central Asian robes on one side, but on the reverse, a whole pantheon of influences appeared: Greek deities like Heracles, Persian Zoroastrian symbols, and later Indian gods like Shiva. This was not confusion, it was deliberate communication to a diverse, mercantile population, a statement that the Kushan ruler was the universal patron of all these traditions and the guarantor of the cross-cultural trade they facilitated. The Celtic tribes of Gaul and Britain, long before full conquest, began producing their own coins that clearly imitated Roman styles, incorporating laurel wreaths and Latin letters alongside traditional Celtic art. This reveals a fascinating preemptive cultural absorption, a way for local elites to signal their sophistication and connection to the powerful Mediterranean world. This practice of tailoring the propaganda reveals an ancient truth about mass communication. The most effective message meets the audience where they are. It acknowledged a fundamental human need to see oneself reflected in the symbols of power. By weaving local threads into the imperial tapestry, these empires did more than just avoid offense. They actively recruited cultural identity into the service of the state, making the coin not just a tool of control, but an instrument of seamless integration. The imperial mint was not the only voice speaking through metal. In the year 66 of the Common Era, within the besieged city of Jerusalem, craftsmen were striking coins of a very different kind. These were silver shekels, but they bore no image of the Roman emperor. Instead, they displayed a simple chalice and the words "Shekel of Israel" in ancient Paleo-Hebrew script. This was an act of profound defiance. By minting their own pure silver currency, the leaders of the Jewish revolt were doing more than funding their resistance. They were issuing a direct material rejection of Roman authority. They were declaring to every person who held one, "Our sovereignty is not just an idea, it is a fact you can spend." This reveals a crucial truth: the propaganda power of coinage was never the exclusive property of established empires. Challengers, rebels, and breakaway states recognized its potential immediately, turning the imperial tool against its creators to broadcast a counter-narrative and legitimize their own cause. These rebel coins served three urgent purposes, each a mirror image of imperial strategy. First, they were a declaration of sovereignty, a physical proof that a new political entity existed with the right to issue its own value. Second, they were a practical fundraising mechanism, essential for paying soldiers and securing supplies when access to imperial treasuries was cut off. But third, and most powerfully, they were a symbolic weapon. By deliberately rejecting the familiar imperial portraits and Latin inscriptions, rebel mints created a visual and ideological separation. They carved out a mental space for an alternative reality, one where Roman power was not supreme. The coin itself became a tiny, circulating manifesto. We see this pattern repeated across the ancient world. In 3rd century Gaul, a series of military commanders broke away from a crumbling Rome to form the so-called Gallic Empire. Their coinage copied the weight, style, and even the portraits of contemporary Roman emperors, but with a critical twist: the inscriptions celebrated the armies of Gaul and the loyalty of the local legions. It was a message aimed squarely at the soldiers, suggesting that their primary allegiance should be to their regional commander and the land they defended, not a distant and ineffective capital. Perhaps the most evocative examples come from Britannia following the Roman conquest. While no confirmed coins of Queen Boudica herself survive, the pattern of later British tribal coinage tells a story of negotiated identity. Local rulers issued beautiful gold staters that blended Celtic artistic sensibilities like abstract horses and swirling patterns, with clear imitations of Roman motifs such as laurel wreaths. This was not mere copying, it was a sophisticated statement of simultaneous engagement and independence. A tribal king was communicating to both his own people and to Roman traders, "I am part of this new economic world, but I am not of Rome. I have my own source of authority and my own cultural language." Studying these rebel and provincial issues is thrilling, for it allows us to hear the other side of history's grand conflicts. The official imperial narrative, stamped on millions of coins, tells the story of order imposed and victories won, but a single, crudely struck rebel piece, hidden in the soil for centuries, whispers the story of resistance, of a different identity fiercely asserted. It proves that every faction in the ancient world understood the same fundamental principle, that whoever controls the currency controls the story. The mint was not just an economic bureau, it was a primary battlefield in the war for hearts and minds, and even the most powerful empires could not monopolize its voice. The propaganda was only as strong as the metal that carried it. A beautifully struck coin with a god's image meant nothing if it bent in your hand or rang with the dull sound of lead. The physical integrity of the coin was the non-negotiable foundation of the entire psychological operation. A state's message of divine mandate, invincible power, and eternal stability collapsed instantly if its currency was soft, light, or easily copied by any clever forger in a back alley workshop. Therefore, empires poured immense resources into the material science of trust, transforming minting from a simple craft into a high-security state secret. Controlling the source was the first imperative. Major powers went to war over mines. Athens derived its wealth and the iconic owl on its coins from the silver veins of Laurium. Rome's denarius relied on Spanish silver, its flow as vital as grain from Egypt. Securing these mineral lifelines was a top strategic priority, for they were the literal ore of imperial credibility. Once the metal was in imperial hands, the next step was absolute standardization. Official mints were not hidden away, they were prominent, fortified facilities in politically symbolic cities like Rome, Alexandria, or Constantinople. Their very location broadcast control. The act of minting was itself a ceremonial assertion of sovereignty, often accompanied by religious rites, as if blessing the metal with state authority. Within these secure compounds, master craftsmen employed a suite of anti-counterfeiting technologies that would feel familiar today. They used intricate, state-controlled dies carved by specialist engravers, whose unique artistic style became a signature of authenticity. High-relief striking required immense pressure, creating sharp, detailed images that were hard to replicate with crude tools. Some mints even employed edge milling, creating fine, reeded patterns on the coin's rim, a technique that prevented the common fraud of shaving precious metal from the edges of coins in circulation. The goal was to create a sensory experience of trust. A genuine imperial coin had a specific heft, a clear, high-pitched ring when dropped on stone, and a crisp, unmistakable strike. Your fingers and ears could authenticate it before your eyes even read the legend. This tangible quality built a subconscious association. The state is solid, reliable, and technologically superior. This is why deliberate debasement was such a perilous gamble. When Emperor Nero famously reduced the silver content of the denarius to fund his lavish projects, it was a calculated fiscal decision. But it was also a detectable leak in the state's propaganda. Merchants and money changers with their sensitive scales and practiced ears would notice. The paler color, the lighter weight, the less resonant ring, these were silent but powerful signals that the empire's promise was weakening. The material trust eroded, making the ideological trust stamped on the surface harder to believe. The state's technological prowess in minting was therefore a direct extension of its political message. A perfect, consistent coin whispered of order, control, and permanence. It made the grand claims of empire feel as real and unchangeable as the cool, heavy metal in your palm. In the end, the most sophisticated propaganda began not with a portrait or a slogan, but with the flawless chemistry of the alloy and the unbreakable security of the mint. The fall of Rome did not shatter the template, it merely scattered the pieces. A new king, crowned in the echoing vastness of St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Day in the year 800, understood the power of those fragments. Charlemagne, hailed as Holy Roman Emperor, did not just build castles and codify laws. One of his first and most significant acts was a radical reform of the currency. He swept away the bewildering variety of local coinages across his realm and introduced a new, standardized silver penny. On one side was his own name, Carolus, a bold assertion of personal authority. On the other was a simple Christian cross. This was not a decorative motif, it was a declaration of mission. With a single, circulating object, Charlemagne fused renewed imperial ambition with the unifying force of the Church, telling every subject from Lombardy to Saxony that their economic life and their spiritual duty were now bound together under his crown. The ancient playbook had been recovered, dusted off, and adapted for a new age of faith and feudalism. This template proved endlessly adaptable, becoming the foundational blueprint for statecraft from European castles to Asian palaces. In the glittering courts of Renaissance Italy, rulers like the Medici of Florence issued magnificent gold florins, their detailed portraits and intricate heraldry broadcasting wealth, taste, and dynastic pride as clearly as any palace fresco. The famous English gold noble, first struck in the 14th century, showed the king standing armed on the deck of a ship. This was not a random scene. It was a concise, powerful message to foreign traders and domestic rivals alike, proclaiming the realm's naval strength, commercial reach, and the sovereign's personal role as its defender. The coin was a tiny, spendable piece of national identity. Across the Mediterranean, the rising Islamic caliphates adopted the tool but transformed its visual language. Following religious tradition that avoided human imagery, Islamic dinars and dirhams became masterpieces of textual proclamation. They were covered in elegant, flowing calligraphy, bearing verses from the Quran, the name of the caliph, and the date according to the Hijri calendar. A coin from the Abbasid or Umayyad Empire was a portable testament of faith and a clear announcement of who held divinely sanctioned political authority. The medium was different, but the core objectives of sovereignty, legitimacy, and ideological messaging were identical to those of Alexander or Augustus. In Ming China, emperors issued round coins with a square central hole, a design enduring for millennia. While these coins primarily carried inscriptions of the imperial reign title rather than portraits, their uniform production by the state and their indispensable role in the vast imperial economy served the same ultimate purpose, reinforcing the central authority's control over daily life and commercial order. The Japanese shogunate would later stamp its own crest, the mon, onto gold koban, making the currency itself a token of the ruling clan's exclusive power to guarantee value. This remarkable continuity across continents and cultures reveals a profound historical truth. The act of minting coinage was never just an economic function. It was, and remained, a primary ritual of sovereignty. Whenever a new ruler, kingdom, or caliphate sought to establish its legitimacy, among its first acts was to issue its own money. The coin was the simplest, most direct way to answer the fundamental questions of governance: who is in charge, by what right do they rule, and what is the unifying idea of their realm. The materials changed from electrum to silver to gold to paper. The symbols evolved from eagles to crosses to calligraphy to heraldic lions, but the psychological mechanism remained locked in place. The state story, stamped on a token of necessity, continued its quiet work in the marketplace, building realities one transaction at a time, proving that the most ancient forms of mass communication could outlast empires themselves. Buried treasure often whispers a more honest story than the grand monuments left standing. An archaeologist's trowel, brushing away centuries of soil in the foundation of a Roman villa in Britain, does not uncover grand statues or inscribed scrolls. Instead, it reveals a humble clay pot heavy with a hoard of silver denarii. The coins spill out, a frozen moment of history in the palm of the hand. The sequence of emperors stamped on them: Trajan, Hadrian, then a sudden jump to the turbulent era of the 3rd century, tells a silent tale. This was not lost pocket change. This was a family's savings, deliberately hidden in a time of crisis, perhaps during a barbarian raid that never made the official histories and never retrieved. For the modern historian, this small pot is a revelation. It offers a material truth that written records, often composed by the victors or the elite, can obscure. Each coin in that hoard is a primary source with a unique voice. The portrait and titles provide a precise date, often down to the specific year of an emperor's reign, allowing archaeologists to layer timelines with remarkable accuracy. They confirm the existence of short-lived or provincial rulers whose names might appear on only a single, fragmentary inscription. The changing imagery on a series of coins acts like a political mood ring, revealing the shifting propaganda priorities of the state. A new emperor, having taken power through conflict, will immediately flood the economy with coins proclaiming peace and harmony, a clear signal of his desire to stabilize a fractured realm. The journey of a single coin after it left the mint writes its own chapter on the map of the ancient world. The distribution patterns of coin finds are like a scatterplot of economic and political life. A cluster of Athenian owl coins in Egypt speaks of vibrant maritime trade. A trail of Roman bronze issues leading to a remote hill fort in Scotland marks the tentative reach of imperial influence, perhaps paid to local chieftains as subsidies or as pay to auxiliary soldiers. This numismatic mapping reveals connections that treaties and chronicles leave out. Modern science allows us to listen to an even subtler story, one told by the metal itself. Through X-ray fluorescence analysis, researchers can detect the gradual debasement of silver coinage, tracing a graph of imperial financial stress that correlates with periods of war, political instability, and inflation. The slow dilution of the denarius is a quantitative history of a state living beyond its means, a silent crisis recorded in the very atoms of its currency. Perhaps most thrilling is when the coins directly correct the historical record. Written accounts of a military campaign on a distant frontier may be lost to time, exaggerated by poets, or minimized by an emperor's scribes. But the coins do not lie. A sudden, concentrated appearance of freshly minted JUDAEA CAPTA coins in the villages around Jerusalem physically anchors the Roman victory and its immediate propaganda push. The discovery of coins bearing the image of a usurper in a region once thought loyal can reveal a forgotten rebellion, a fissure in the empire's facade. In this way, these ancient instruments of controlled messaging have become, ironically, our most reliable and durable witnesses. They were designed to shape contemporary perception, to broadcast a curated reality. Yet, by their sheer volume, their physical composition, and their final resting places, they now provide the material evidence to decode the economic pressures, the political anxieties, and the hard truths that existed behind the crafted facade. The coin, a tool of propaganda in life, becomes in death an artifact of profound honesty, offering a tangible connection to the hopes, fears, and hidden realities of the people who once clutched it tightly, before burying it for a future they would never see. That hidden pot of coins reveals a truth its creators never intended. The propaganda tools of the past now serve as a mirror, reflecting the mechanics of our own modern world with uncanny clarity. The leap from a stamped silver denarius to a glowing television screen or a curated social media feed is a journey of technology, not of fundamental human psychology. Both are state or corporate-controlled media designed for the widest possible dissemination. Both rely on simplified, repeatable symbols and emotionally resonant narratives. And both at their core aim to shape public identity, loyalty, and a shared sense of reality. The ancient coin was, in its essence, the social media of its day. It was a decentralized yet tightly controlled system of information flow that reached physically into every home and marketplace. The emperor's stern profile was the original state-sanctioned profile picture. The brief, potent inscriptions circling his image were the official status updates of the empire, announcing military victories, imperial virtues, and dynastic continuity. Where the Roman state used the intrinsic value of precious metal to guarantee the coin's circulation and acceptance, our modern systems operate on a different but parallel currency, the economics of attention. The goal is the same: to ensure the message is seen, handled, and absorbed. Recognizing this deep lineage is profoundly empowering, for it demystifies our contemporary information landscape. The strategies we navigate daily are not unprecedented digital inventions. They are highly evolved adaptations of very old techniques of power. The careful association of leadership with divine right or moral authority, the celebratory broadcasting of selective victories while minimizing setbacks, the manufacturing of consensus through sheer, relentless repetition, these are the timeless tools of mass persuasion. They were forged in the mint, not the server farm. This understanding prompts a crucial shift in perspective. It encourages us to become archaeologists of our own moment, to look at the images and messages that flood our daily lives with the same critical eye we might turn on an ancient artifact. When we see a political symbol repeated everywhere, or a simplified narrative dominating discussion, we can recognize the ancient pattern at work. The medium has transformed beyond recognition, but the underlying objective to build a shared story that serves a central authority remains. By seeing the coin in the click, we gain the clarity to be more intentional, more discerning consumers of the realities being offered to us, remembering that the most powerful narratives are often the ones we carry without a second thought. This seamless fusion of money and message forces us to confront a deep ethical puzzle. If the very object you need to live also carries an inescapable ideology, can your consent to that ideology ever be truly free? The ancient state, by merging its story with the currency, created a perfect system of what modern thinkers might call a choice architecture. There was no overt force, no soldier demanding you recite loyalty oaths. Instead, the architecture of daily life, the market, the tax collection, the army payroll was meticulously designed so that participating in the economy meant passively absorbing the state's narrative. To reject the propaganda, you would have to reject the coin and, by extension, withdraw from society itself. This was an impossible choice for the vast majority, making the soft power of minted metal perhaps the hardest power of all to resist. It operated on a pre-conscious level, building beliefs through repetitive action rather than intellectual debate. The ethical tension here is timeless. On one hand, this propaganda could foster remarkable social cohesion. It gave a diverse, far-flung population a shared symbolic language and a common story about their place in the world, which could provide stability and a sense of belonging during uncertain times. The consistent imagery of peace, prosperity, and divine favor offered a psychological anchor. Yet, this cohesion came at a significant cost. It systematically crowded out alternative narratives and local perspectives. The single, state-sanctioned version of reality, stamped on every transaction, made competing truth seem not just incorrect, but illegitimate and invisible. It naturalized autocratic power, making the concentration of authority in one divine or semi-divine figure feel as inevitable and natural as the sunrise, rather than a human construct open to question. This historical reflection invites us to examine our own landscapes of influence. We no longer carry emperors' portraits in our pockets, but we are surrounded by equally pervasive, often commercially or politically driven narratives that shape our perceptions through the architecture of our digital and economic lives. The core dilemma remains: where is the line between fostering a healthy, unified society and manipulating the boundaries of acceptable thought? The ancient lesson is not that state messaging is inherently wrong, but that its power is dangerously amplified when it monopolizes the essential channels of daily life. It underscores the profound importance of maintaining robust, independent spaces for critique, art, and dialogue, spaces that operate outside official channels. A healthy society, then and now, may be measured not by the uniformity of its story, but by the vitality of the conversations happening just beyond the reach of the mint. The artistic quality of a coin was never an afterthought. It was the final, crucial layer of its persuasive power, transforming crude metal into a miniature gallery of statecraft. Those earliest Lydian electrum lumps bore simple punches, basic symbols of authority, but as empires grew, so did their ambition to communicate not just ownership, but an entire worldview. The leap from those rough stamps to the exquisitely detailed, high-relief portraits of a Roman emperor represents one of history's most deliberate fusions of art and propaganda. This evolution was driven by a revolution in technique. Early coins were created by placing a blank metal flan between two engraved dies and striking the top one with a heavy hammer. The results were often uneven, with designs blurred or off-center, but over centuries, die engravers honed their craft into a high art. They learned to carve deeper, more intricate dies from hardened bronze or iron, allowing them to capture astonishing detail. They mastered the play of light and shadow, using varying depths to create a sense of three-dimensional life on a surface smaller than a thumbnail. This technical mastery unlocked a new psychological dimension. An emperor's portrait could now convey specific, carefully curated emotions meant to resonate with the public. Look at a coin of Vespasian, his features rugged and stern, jaw set with military resolve, a portrait designed to project stability and strength after a brutal civil war. Contrast this with a coin of Marcus Aurelius, his gaze often distant and thoughtful, his beard and furrowed brow suggesting the weight of philosophical duty, the ideal of the philosopher king. These were not generic faces, they were emotional scripts minted by the million, telling citizens exactly how to perceive their leader. The reverse of the coin became a canvas for ever more complex storytelling. Instead of a single symbol, entire scenes unfolded in miniature. You might witness a detailed sacrifice at an altar, with every ritual vessel precisely rendered, reinforcing the emperor's piety. A triumphal procession could show captives and trophies in meticulous order, a narrative of victory in the palm of your hand. Architectural marvels like the Colosseum or a newly built aqueduct were depicted not as static buildings, but as symbols of imperial generosity and eternal achievement. This lavish artistic investment was itself a powerful, unspoken message. A state that could afford to employ the finest engravers, that poured such care into an object destined for a farmer's calloused hand, was broadcasting its immense wealth and cultural supremacy. It implied that an empire capable of such meticulous, beautiful control on a tiny scale was effortlessly capable of governing continents. The beauty had a practical propaganda effect as well. A stunning coin was more desirable. It was less likely to be melted down, more likely to be hoarded, traded, and admired. This extended the lifespan of its message for generations, allowing the image of a long-dead emperor to continue influencing perceptions long after his passing. The coin transcended its economic function, becoming a collectible piece of art, a permanent ambassador for a regime's sophistication. In this final aesthetic refinement, the ancient tool of control achieved its most potent form. It made people want to believe the story it told, simply because the telling was so magnificent. The artistic perfection of a coin was a promise, but during the 3rd century, that promise visibly corroded in the hands of Roman citizens. This period, often called the crisis of the 3rd century, saw emperors rise and fall with brutal speed, their reigns measured in months rather than decades. In this maelstrom of civil war, foreign invasion, and economic collapse, the silver denarius underwent a startling physical transformation. It grew lighter, its silver content dwindling to a mere thin wash over a bronze core. You could see the copper bleeding through at the edges, a stark, tangible manifestation of imperial instability that no triumphant inscription could fully mask. This was propaganda in a purely defensive, reactive mode, a desperate attempt to maintain the facade of a functioning state while its foundations crumbled. The primary driver was the relentless need to pay vast armies, the very soldiers who made and unmade emperors. Debasement accelerated, creating more coins from less precious metal to meet these urgent, non-negotiable payrolls. Yet, even as the metal degraded, the mints worked overtime, stamping these feeble coins with some of the most hopeful, assertive slogans in Roman history. Words like Restitutoriplicae, Restorer of the Republic, or Fidesmilitum, Loyalty of the Soldiers, encircled the fading portraits. These crisis coins are fascinating studies in contradiction. In one palm, a citizen held the material proof of decay, a pale, lightweight disc. With their eyes, they read a bold declaration of renewal and unshakable allegiance. The state was asking its people, and more critically its troops, to believe the legend, not the ledger. This reveals the ultimate stress test for minted propaganda. For generations, the system worked because the state's message of power and the coin's tangible value were aligned, each reinforcing the other. But in times of extreme hardship, that link could snap. When the promised value, both ideological and metallic, was perceived as hollow, populations grew cynical and anxious. A soldier paid in debased silver might cheer the title restorer of the army on the coin, but he would also notice it bought less bread than the purer coins of his father's day. The psychological contract was breaking. These periods show the limits of propaganda when it becomes disconnected from tangible reality. The imagery and inscriptions could not, in the long term, compensate for a failure to deliver security and stability. The coins of crisis are therefore among the most honest artifacts we have. They do not record a glorious fiction, they capture a state's frantic, public negotiation with its own crumbling authority, a silent dialogue between hope stamped in letters and fear felt in the unsettling lightness of the metal itself. A coin could signal a change of government, but it could also announce a change of gods. The most profound ideological shift in the late Roman world, the empire's official conversion to Christianity, was not just debated in church councils, it was minted into existence. For the average citizen, the first tangible sign of this seismic change came not from a priest's sermon, but from the silver and bronze in their purse. Early Christian emperors like Constantine the Great began this quiet revolution. They did not immediately erase the old symbols, instead, they introduced new ones alongside them. The radiant profile of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun that had been a central imperial deity, now shared space on coins with the Chi-Rho monogram, the first two Greek letters of Christ's name. This visual blending was a masterful political and spiritual strategy. It allowed for a gradual transition, letting a population accustomed to solar symbolism slowly associate divine light with a new Christian source. Over the decades, the balance shifted decisively. the sun god faded and the cross emerged triumphant, standing alone as the empire's definitive sacred emblem. This was propaganda with a missionary purpose. Every transaction became a tiny, silent lesson in orthodoxy. A pagan making an offering at a temple would have to use a coin stamped with the very symbol of the faith that sought to replace his own. The marketplace, a neutral ground of commerce, was subtly transformed into an arena of religious persuasion, where the state's preferred theology was literally the currency of the realm. This minted campaign to shape belief was not a one-way street. It met resistance, and that resistance too was stamped on coins. The reign of Emperor Julian, known to history as Julian the Apostate, stands as a brief, fascinating counter-revolution. Julian, a philosopher who rejected the Christianity of his upbringing, attempted to restore the old pagan traditions. His coinage was a direct, deliberate weapon in this cultural war. He removed Christian symbols and revived imagery of Rome's ancient gods and traditional Roman virtues. A bull, symbol of pagan sacrifice, reappeared. His portrait sometimes showed him with a philosopher's beard, consciously echoing the style of pre-Christian emperors. This was more than nostalgia. It was a calculated use of the monetary system to delegitimize the new faith and rehabilitate the old. His effort ultimately failed, and his early passing allowed Christianity to regain its momentum on the imperial coinage. But his reign proves how clearly rulers understood the power of currency as a tool for directing spiritual allegiance. The coin was a front line in the war for the empire's soul, and both sides fought for control of its design. A similar but far more lasting transformation occurred with the rise of Islam. When the early Islamic caliphates conquered the wealthy provinces of the Byzantine and Persian empires, they inherited sophisticated monetary systems covered in figurative art, crosses, and fire altars. The Caliph Abd al-Malik instituted one of the most decisive reforms in monetary history. He completely redesigned the coinage, removing all human and animal images in accordance with Islamic tradition. In their place, he covered the gold dinars and silver dirhams with elegant, flowing Arabic calligraphy. These inscriptions bore verses from the Quran, the declaration of faith, and the name and title of the caliph. This was a revolutionary act of ideological distinction. A coin was no longer a portable portrait gallery. It was a portable text. It announced to every user, believer and non-believer alike, that a new political and spiritual order had arrived, one founded on the Word of God as revealed to the prophet. This reform was a central pillar of state building, unifying a vast and diverse empire under a clear visual and doctrinal identity. It directly challenged the iconic traditions of Byzantium to the west and the Zoroastrian symbolism of Persia to the east, marking a clean break on the most practical level of daily life. Thus, the smallest change in a coin's design could ripple out into a tidal wave of cultural change. The shift from a sunburst to a cross, or from an emperor's face to a verse from scripture, was never merely decorative. It was a deliberate signal of a civilization turning in a new spiritual direction. These changes reached into the hands of believers and skeptics, the devout and the indifferent, with a persistence that sermons and edicts could not match. The coin became a tiny, weighty apostle, carrying a new gospel or defending an old one with every exchange. In this silent, metallic dialogue, we see that faith and power have always been intertwined, and the battle for hearts and minds was often fought not with swords, but with the symbols we agree to use as money. A magnifying glass passes slowly over the worn silver surface, catching the light on a profile almost erased by 2,000 years of hands. In that quiet moment of a modern collector's study, the ancient propaganda machine whirs back to life. Numismatics today is far more than a hobby of accumulation. It is the active, tactile practice of decoding history. Each coin in a carefully curated tray is a primary source waiting to be interrogated. its metal holding secrets that scrolls and stones often keep silent. The collector becomes a detective, learning the visual language of power. They train their eye to distinguish the stern jaw of Vespasian from the philosophical brow of Marcus Aurelius, to spot the subtle differences in portraiture that signal a new engraver at a distant provincial mint. A tiny mark, a mint mark hidden in the design, can reveal that this particular denarius was struck in Lugdunum in Gaul, not Rome, mapping the administrative spread of the empire through its currency. The symbols on the reverse are no longer mysterious, they are a familiar vocabulary. A goddess holding a cornucopia speaks of promised abundance. A captured trophy whispers of a military campaign the emperor needed his people to remember. This intimate, hands-on study ensures the messages crafted for mass consumption in antiquity now receive the individual, focused attention of a historian. The market itself reflects this enduring legacy. A coin's value at auction is rarely about its weight in silver or gold alone. It is a direct appraisal of its historical narrative and artistic execution. A beautifully preserved portrait of a rare usurper, or a reverse celebrating a forgotten temple dedication, commands a premium. The very qualities that made a coin effective propaganda, its clarity, its artistry, its ideological punch, are the same qualities that make it a coveted piece of history today. In this way, the cycle of meaning continues unbroken. The state minted these objects to control a contemporary story, but by collecting, preserving, and studying them, we grant those stories a new, unintended longevity. We become the latest audience in a chain of perception that stretches back millennia, holding in our palms not just a piece of the past, but the physical instrument of its most pervasive persuasion. This ongoing dialogue between the present and the past, conducted through these small metallic discs, keeps the study of power alive, reminding us that to understand how a society speaks to itself, we need only look at what it once placed in everyone's hands. The strategies perfected in the mint are not relics, they are blueprints. A modern political strategist designing a campaign logo or a corporate team launching a brand identity are engaging in the same fundamental craft as the engravers of Rome or Constantinople. They simply have new tools. The core principles remain unchanged: the need for a consistent, instantly recognizable image, the power of linking that image to positive, universal values, and the critical importance of saturating the environment so the message becomes inescapable. Think of the most iconic corporate logos today: the simple apple, the swoosh, the golden arches. They function with the same efficiency as the Athenian owl or the Roman eagle, creating immediate recognition and a cascade of emotional associations without a single word. They are modern sigils of trust and identity, stamped not on metal but on products, screens, and buildings. Political campaigns operate on this ancient currency of simplicity. They distill complex, multifaceted platforms into potent, repeatable slogans and a curated visual palette of colors and symbols, aiming to own a single word or concept in the public mind, much like an imperial mint promoted virtus or securitas. The candidate's face, carefully photographed and distributed across every possible medium, is the direct descendant of the Imperial Portrait, engineered to project specific qualities of strength, empathy, or stability into the collective consciousness. This extends into the very language we use to describe influence. We speak of social currency, of ideas that gain or lose value, of minting a reputation or seeing a phrase circulate online. These are not casual metaphors, they are the deep, structural inheritance of a world where authority was literally coined. The lesson from the ancient masters is not about deception, but about the architecture of lasting influence. It reveals that successful, long-term authority is not built through occasional grand pronouncements, but through the subtle, relentless weaving of a narrative into the mundane rituals of daily existence. It is about making your core message so commonplace, so embedded in the environment of life, that it ceases to feel like a message at all and starts to feel like part of the natural order of things. Whether the goal is to build a 1,000-year empire, a beloved century-old brand, or a lasting political legacy, the path is the same. Transform your story into the shared currency of everyday life until it is carried forward not by decree but by habit. That same Roman denarius paid to a soldier on the Danube could end up in a silk merchant's strongbox in Chang'an. Its journey reveals a profound, unintended consequence of minted propaganda, the creation of the first globalized economies. While emperors designed coins to broadcast their own power, traders valued them for a simpler reason: universal trust. A merchant from Palmyra heading east with a caravan did not care if the portrait was of Trajan or Hadrian. He cared that the silver content was consistent and that any trading partner from the Caspian Sea to the Indus River would accept its weight without question. The imperial guarantee stamped on the face became, ironically, a passport far beyond imperial borders. This reliability transformed coins like the Athenian owl, the Persian daric, and later the Byzantine solidus into the world's first true international currencies. They were the ancient equivalent of the modern dollar or euro, a stable medium that enabled commerce across linguistic and cultural chasms. The economic networks they forged became a powerful, silent form of influence, one that often proved more durable than military conquest. Regions were bound together not by force but by mutual need, their interdependence woven through the steady flow of silver and gold bearing foreign faces. The propaganda had created a shared language of value, and the marketplace began to speak it fluently. This phenomenon is beautifully illustrated by the waves of imitation that rippled across ancient trade routes. In the Kushan Empire, which controlled the vital crossroads between Rome, India, and China, local rulers issued gold coins that were clear homages to the Roman denarius. They adopted the technique of the realistic royal portrait, but substituted their own likenesses, blending Roman style with local dress and deities. Further east, in India, rulers produced silver coins that copied the weight and broad appearance of Roman issues, sometimes even including garbled Latin letters, a testament to the coin's prestige rather than its political message. These were not forgeries, but flattery and pragmatic adaptation. They signal that the original imperial coin was so trusted and desirable that mimicking its form was the quickest way for a rising power to gain credibility in long-distance trade. The coin's primary function as a political billboard was being subtly subverted by its secondary function as an economic tool. The propaganda had escaped its creators, becoming a template for connection rather than control. This established early standards for international exchange, a precursor to the financial systems that would later link continents. The widespread acceptance of these trusted currencies meant a merchant could calculate risks and profits across thousands of miles with a reasonable expectation of stability. It reduced the friction of trade, encouraging the movement of not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and artistic styles along with the coins that paid for them. Thus, the very weapon designed for political consolidation became an inadvertent tool for peaceful integration. The relentless pursuit of control, stamped onto millions of coins, had forged the physical infrastructure of globalization. It created frameworks for cooperation that operated independently of emperors and armies, binding the Mediterranean world to South Asia in a web of mutual economic interest. The lingua franca of this system was the imagery and metallic guarantee of a distant power, repurposed by countless hands for a common goal: prosperity. This reveals a deep historical irony that systems built for dominance can sometimes generate the very connections that transcend them. The coin, born as an instrument of state propaganda, evolved in the crucible of the marketplace into a symbol of shared human enterprise, demonstrating that even the tools of authority can take on a life of their own, weaving threads of interdependence that outlast the empires that first spun them. The propaganda etched in metal was a powerful voice, but it was never the only one heard in the ancient marketplace. For all its sophistication, the state's message on a coin was not an infallible command. Populations could and did read against the grain, interpreting the silent signals of the currency itself. A sudden lightening of the silver denarius, a subtle change in its ring, spoke louder than any triumphant slogan. To a merchant weighing coins day after day, this debasement was not a hidden technicality. It was a tangible whisper of imperial weakness, a crack in the facade of eternal stability promised by the emperor's portrait. The grand claims stamped on the surface could be hollowed out by the reality of the metal in your hand. Consider the vivid case of Emperor Caligula. His coinage was a masterpiece of dynastic propaganda, loudly proclaiming his divine honors and his direct lineage to the revered Augustus. Yet these carefully minted messages could not salvage his reputation from the narratives of excess and poor governance preserved by later historians like Suetonius. The coin said one thing, but the lived experience of his rule and the stories that outlived him said another. This divergence reveals a critical limit. Imagery could build a persona, but it could not permanently overwrite a legacy of hardship or poor judgment experienced by the people. The most dramatic failure occurred when economic reality diverged too sharply from the promise. During the Roman Empire's 3rd century crisis, periods of hyperinflation rendered the currency's message utterly meaningless. A coin bearing the word providentia, signifying the foresight and care of the emperor, was worthless for buying grain. In that moment, the entire psychological architecture of trust collapsed. The state's story of provision and order was exposed as fiction, not by a rival's argument but by the empty marketplace. This breakdown of trust had direct political consequences. Rebellions, often funded by their own rebel coinage, proved that alternative narratives could take root and flourish despite the state's official monopoly on minting. The act of striking a coin with a different face or legend was the ultimate materialization of dissent, proving that populations could mentally exit the imperial story and invest their belief and their savings in a new one. These historical failures highlight a timeless principle. While propaganda can powerfully shape perception and manufacture consent, it cannot indefinitely sustain a regime in the absence of competent governance, military security, and a basic degree of economic fairness. The coin was a tool for managing reality, not a substitute for it. When the gap between the minted image and the daily struggle grew too wide, the spell was broken. The ancient evidence quietly reminds us that audiences, even without modern media literacy, possessed a sharp, pragmatic critical faculty. They judged the message by the results it delivered in their lives. A victory coin issued after a costly, Pyrrhic conflict might be met with silent skepticism by veterans who knew the true price. Trust, once fractured by the hard edges of reality, proved extraordinarily difficult to restore with imagery alone. The propaganda machine was mighty, but it ultimately relied on a currency far more valuable than gold or silver, the genuine credibility earned through actions that matched the words stamped on the metal. The final frontier for this ancient contest is not a new metal, but a new medium, one that exists only as lines of code and encrypted data. As physical cash recedes, replaced by digital transactions and the speculative whirlwind of cryptocurrency, we are witnessing not the end of monetary propaganda, but its most radical evolution. The tangible coin, with its fixed portrait and unchanging legend, is giving way to a far more fluid and powerful form of messaging, one that operates in real time and can be tailored to the individual. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, currently in development by nations around the world, represent the potential culmination of this millennia-long project. These are not mere digital versions of cash. They are programmable money, issued and controlled directly by the state. Imagine a future where your digital currency could be coded with an expiration date to encourage spending during an economic downturn, or restricted from being used for purchases the state deems undesirable. Social policy could be baked directly into the medium of exchange, rewarding certain behaviors with tax credits automatically applied to your digital wallet. The propaganda here is not an image you see, but a rule set you experience, a seamless integration of state priorities into the very act of value transfer. The symbolic imagery shifts from stamped eagles and crosses to the sleek, trusted interface of an official government app, a new kind of mint mark for the digital age. Yet the core struggle remains identical: who gets to define what value is, and who gets to broadcast that definition to the population. In this landscape, decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin present themselves as the ultimate rebel coinage. Their founding myth is one of liberation from central banks and government oversight, a form of anti-state counter-propaganda written in blockchain. They offer a narrative of individual sovereignty, trust built through mathematics, and distributed consensus rather than through a royal portrait or a state seal. Just as a Roman rebel mint-struck coins to materialize an alternative political reality, a cryptocurrency mints digital tokens to materialize an alternative financial reality. The message is encoded in the very architecture. No single authority controls this story. But this new frontier is fraught with its own paradoxes. Will a digital unit minted by a central bank carry the same psychological weight as a solid gold solidus? The physicality of ancient coinage gave its message a heft and permanence that a fleeting screen notification may lack. Yet, the potential for pervasive, personalized influence is exponentially greater. Digital trails already allow for unprecedented economic surveillance, a form of control that ancient emperors could only dream of. The future may hold a splintered monetary landscape, a silent war of narratives fought not with hammers and dies but with algorithms and wallet addresses. The ancient story teaches us that the medium will always adapt, but the fundamental human drama remains. We are still building systems to answer those primal questions. Who do we trust? What story of value will we collectively accept? And how will that story shape the community we become? The propaganda of the future may be invisible, but its purpose is as old as civilization itself: to turn the essential act of exchange into a quiet lesson in belonging. Pull a coin from your pocket and hold it up to the light. That quarter, that euro, that yen is a living artifact in your hand, a direct heir to the propaganda machines of Lydia, Rome, and Byzantium. Look closely at its design, whose portrait gazes back at you, which national emblem, animal, or building is stamped beside it, what words are inscribed along its edge. These are not neutral decorations. They are the latest chapter in a 3,000-year-old story of state-sponsored identity. Your nation is telling you a story about itself every time you make a purchase, a story of founding fathers, cultural icons, or natural wonders deemed worthy of permanent honor. The Latin phrase e pluribus unum on a United States coin, or the national motto on any currency, functions exactly like the imperial virtues stamped on a Roman cestatius, broadcasting a core ideal meant to unite a diverse population under a shared banner. The choice of which historical figure to feature is a profound political statement, a declaration of whose legacy defines the national character. The architectural marvels depicted, from ancient temples to modern government buildings, serve as circulating monuments, just as the Colosseum once did on Roman coinage, projecting an image of stability, achievement, and enduring civilization. By performing this simple act of observation, you bridge the scholarly distance. History is no longer locked in a museum case. It is resting in the palm of your hand, worn smooth by countless transactions. You become an archaeologist of the present moment, decoding the symbols that your own society has chosen to mint into its daily reality. This conscious shift in perspective is transformative. It moves you from being a passive user of currency, someone who merely accepts it as a tool, to an active interpreter of a continuous dialogue. You start to see the patterns. Why is this person on the coin and not another? What era of history or set of values does this design celebrate? And by extension, what does it quietly omit? This awareness is the first, crucial step in cultivating a critical eye toward the many forms of persuasion that surround us. It recognizes that the narratives shaping our sense of community and purpose are not only delivered through screens and speeches, but are also embedded in the most mundane objects of our existence. The dialogue between power and people has been literally in our pockets for millennia, and it continues every time we hand over a piece of metal or tap a phone to pay. To hold a coin with this understanding is to hold a key, a small, cold key to reading the silent stories that build our world. That final coin in your hand is a direct descendant of the first stamped electrum in Lydia, a link in an unbroken chain of power and persuasion. Our journey through the mints of antiquity reveals a single, profound truth. Controlling the medium of exchange has always meant influencing the medium of thought. Those small metal discs were never just money. They were mobile billboards, personal endorsements, historical records, and divine affirmations, all working in silent concert to build and maintain vast imperial identities. They turned every market transaction, every soldier's pay, and every tax payment into a subtle act of ideological participation, weaving the state's preferred story into the very fabric of daily survival. To decode their symbols and inscriptions is to gain more than historical knowledge. It is to acquire a critical lens for our own age. We now navigate a world saturated with narratives, from the curated imagery of political campaigns to the pervasive logos of corporate branding, each vying to shape our identity and allegiance with a sophistication the ancient engravers would instantly recognize. The core mechanism remains unchanged, the repetition of a simplified message through an essential or attractive medium. Let this exploration serve as a reminder that the most powerful messages are rarely the loudest proclamations. They are the quiet, persistent ones woven into the environment of our lives, the stories we carry forward without a second thought. By understanding this ancient playbook, we empower ourselves to look more clearly at the currencies of influence that circulate around us today. If this perspective on the hidden language of power resonated with you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to continue delving into the profound mysteries of history that quietly shape our present.